On Saturdays, if he could get away, they would drive down to Graveney Holt. But there he was busy with his family, for which his affection was deep and staunch, and with the estate, in the conduct of which he took a keen interest. She felt herself as unnecessary to him as in London. She retired into herself. She was not a woman to make scenes, and she was sensible enough to know that they would only irritate Roger. What had she to complain of? Nothing that could be remedied. She remained gracious, pleasant, a trifle silent, and never by a word disclosed that there was an aching emptiness in her heart. Then the General's agent died, and Roger strongly recommended him to engage an old friend of his called Richard Murray. He had been at school with Roger, and for a year at Sandhurst with him, but his mother, a widow, suffering a financial reverse, he had abandoned the notion of going into the army and had gone into a state agency. May had never met him till she found him installed in the village. She took a fancy to him, and next time Roger came back from abroad told him how much she liked his father's new agent. "He's a rattling good chap," said Roger. "He's got an amazing gift for friendship. He's as straight as a die, and what he doesn't know about his job isn't worth knowing. I think father's damned lucky to have got hold of him." May saw a great deal of him when she went down to Graveney. With Jim at Oxford and Tommy at school, the house was very quiet, and Dick brought a welcome gaiety into it. He was a bachelor, and he came to lunch every Sunday, but Mrs. Henderson asked him in to dinner once or twice a week, and a day seldom passed without his coming to see the General on estate business, and stopping for a few minutes to say a few words to the two ladies. Sometimes May met him in the village, and they would stop and talk for a little. During the summer holidays he would often come up to make a four at tennis. It gave May pleasure to see him. He was gay, unassuming, and easy to talk to. She found that she could say all sorts of things to him that she had never thought of saying to anyone else. She could talk nonsense with him, as it was impossible to do with Roger. She was flattered because he found her amusing, and though she told herself that he laughed at her little jests because he laughed easily, it was nice to be appreciated. Of course he had charm, immense charm, there was no doubt about that, and it was no wonder that everybody liked him. She asked herself what it was due to. Well, it was the contrast between his gray, strong, curly hair and his bronzed, smooth face, the thick lashes of his blue eyes, and that warm, friendly smile that made you feel that his heart went out to you because he had a natural love for his fellow beings. She had known him for a full year when, in London for a while, and as usual alone, she received a note from him to say that he had to come up to town for a night, and couldn't they dine together and go to some place to dance. She thought it very sweet of him to take pity on her solitariness, and accepted with pleasure. They spent a delightful evening. He was an unexpectedly good dancer, and she hadn't danced for months. When he dropped her at her door, he suggested that they should repeat the experiment next time he came to London. She agreed without hesitation. It was long since she had enjoyed herself so much. But when she closed the door behind her, instead of going straight to bed, she went into the empty sitting room and sat down. She was breathless. When he held her hand to bid her goodbye, there had been in his eyes a look so tender, so gentle, so strangely understanding, that it stabbed her to the heart. She knew on a sudden that he had realized how empty her life was and was sorry, wistfully sorry for her. And as suddenly she knew that she was in love with him, and had never been in love before. She was frightened out of her wits. That was the last straw. She had been dissatisfied with life, but resigned and determined to make the best of it. But this was going to be hell. It was bad enough to be starving for bread, and be given a stone, but when the bread was there within your reach, and you might not stretch out your hand for it, no, that was too much to put up with. Her strong common sense came to the rescue. There was nothing to be dramatic about. It was only Dick's charm. Charm. People always said it meant nothing. Roger had often told her that one must be wary of people who had it. Dick was charming to everyone because he couldn't help it. It had probably never occurred to him that it had such a devastating effect, and there was not the smallest reason to suppose that he cared two straws for her. He was a naturally friendly soul, and had wanted to give her a good time. But what had made him see that she was unhappy and lonely? She was sure that never by a word or sign had she betrayed her feeling, and was convinced that neither Roger nor Jane nor anyone else had an inkling of it. But had he seen it, or was that just her fancy? And had she read in the blueness of his eyes a meaning that was not there? She shrugged her shoulders. "I dare say it's only because I'm dog-tired," she murmured. "I shall feel quite differently tomorrow." She went to bed, and soon fell into a deep sleep. Next day, as she had foreseen, she found herself able to consider the matter with calm. It was no good shutting her eyes to the fact. She was in love. But it never occurred to her for a moment that she could do anything but push back into her inmost heart this new trouble, as for so long she had pushed back her frustrated hopes. It was impossible never to see Dick, but she made up her mind not to go down so frequently to Graveney as during Roger's absences she had been in the habit of doing, and should Dick ever ask her again to go dancing with him, firmly to refuse. She must try not to think of him. With the world in an unsettled state, war might be imminent. Roger told her it was bound to come sooner or later, and to distract her mind she thought it would be a good plan to take up some occupation that would enable her to be useful if it broke out. That very morning she made inquiries about nursing, and a couple of days later started upon a course that had the added advantage that it would give her an excuse not to go down to Graveney except for an occasional week-end. She found that it helped to have work to do, and she took it seriously. A month passed without any sign from Dick, and she laughed at herself wryly when she thought of the brave resolutions she had made to say no when next he came up to London and asked her to go out with him. She had been right. What she had thought was deep feeling on his part was no more than natural kindliness, and he would be dismayed if he knew the effect it had had on her. But she was angry with herself because she could not but feel a trifle sore. Then one evening, when she had just got back from the hospital and was tired and depressed, the telephone bell rang. She answered, and the blood rushed to her heart when she heard Dick's voice. "I'm only in London for the day. I'm going back tonight. I was wondering if you'd give me a spot of dinner." This was so little what she had expected that she lost her head and did not make the obvious excuse that she was engaged. "There's nothing much to eat. I was just going to have an egg," she said. "Oh, that's all right. I'll bring in a PT or something." It was impossible to say that he mustn't come, and she wanted to see him so badly. His voice over the telephone, that warm, caressing voice, took all her strength away. "You needn't do that. I'll manage. I'll be up at 7:30. She sent the maid out to buy a sole and some cutlets, had a bath, and put on a very simple dress. She seldom used rouge, but her cheeks were so pale that she felt obliged to put on a little. Then, with one eye on the clock, she read the evening paper. The minutes passed with maddening slowness. When she heard the bell ring, she started violently. But when he came in and gave her his cordial handshake, there was nothing to show that she was not her usual placid and amiable self. He explained that a sudden piece of business had brought him unexpectedly up to London, or he would have written and asked her to keep the evening for him. She gave him a glass of sherry. They dined. He talked in his usual fluent, pleasant way, telling her the news of the estate. He asked her advice on some point that was troubling him, and when she gave it told her he thought it first-rate and would act on it. She could not but be pleased and flattered. They discussed his plan to introduce modern methods of agriculture. He was in full agreement with her on the necessity of ameliorating housing conditions for the laborers. Their conversation could have been heard by anyone, and no one could have found in it anything that was not perfectly natural. And yet she had an uneasy feeling that it was not quite natural. She tried to persuade herself that it was only her fancy, that he was talking in order to avoid a silence fraught with danger, and that there was in the tone of his voice something strange. The look in his eyes was anxious and did not accord with the sense of his words. Folly. She was reading into them something that was due only to her own imagination. They finished dinner and went back to the sitting room. They drank their coffee and May lit a cigarette. Dick asked her if he might smoke his pipe. He was silent while he lit it, and then somehow the silence, like an emanation rising from the depths, dark and terrifying, a thing with a sinister life of its own, seized them, thrusting itself between them and yet drawing them together as in a common danger. Though May was looking down at the floor, she knew that Dick's eyes were fixed upon her. She felt herself trembling. It was absurd that she could not speak. The silence was unendurable. At last she raised her eyes, and they met his. That seemed to break the spell. "You know, a very awkward thing has happened," he said, still in that strange voice. "I've fallen head over heels in love with you." She did not say anything. She looked at him, and tears filled her eyes and trickled down her face. "Are you in love with me?" She still could not speak. She only nodded. "Bore, isn't it?" She laughed through her tears. It was so like him to say that. "Do you think I ought to go away?" She gave a gasp. Her face was suddenly twisted with anguish. "No," she cried violently. But she made a great effort to control herself. "The Hendersons wouldn't hear of it. The General thinks you're indispensable." It was a fact that Dick had brought order into the estate which the last agent, old and none too competent, had allowed to fall into poor condition, and for the first time in years it was being run at a profit. At that rate it would be possible to start paying off the mortgages. "It's serious, you know," he continued. "It's not just a passing infatuation that I can get over. I'm in it up to the neck, and I'm in it for good. Where would you go?" "I don't know. I might get another job as agent somewhere else, or I might emigrate. That's what fellows generally do when they're up a gum tree." There was another long silence, and it was May who broke it. "Can't we ignore it?" He did not answer, and presently she went on. "Why should you throw up a good job, and one that suits you? No one need know anything about it. We're not going to do anybody any harm. We needn't even talk about it. It's just something between ourselves. I don't think I quite know what you mean. I don't love Roger, you know, but I'd never do anything that was, oh, you must know what I mean. I think the only thing to do is to go on as we were. After all, we're both decent people, aren't we? Roger's my oldest friend, and he got me this job. Of course I wouldn't do the dirty on him. Well then," with his elbows on his knees and his face on his clenched fists, he fell into deep thought. She watched him anxiously. Every now and then he gave her a troubled glance. "It's a hell of a situation," he said at last. "Do you want to go?" "God, no. It would break my heart," he cried. "Well then, let's face it. Surely we've got the strength. You don't understand. You think we'll get over it. But I don't want to get over it. I don't either. It's all I've got to live for." They left it at that. He agreed to let things slide and see how they went. She felt that he was prepared to lean on her strength, and she exulted in the thought that he was glad to do so. It made her proud and confident. "Now you'd better go," she said. "I suppose I had," he answered, getting up. "May I kiss you?" She did not speak. He took her in his arms and pressed his lips to hers. She had never known that a kiss could mean so much. She threw her arms round his neck. "Darling, darling, I love you," she murmured. "My sweet." The kiss shattered her. When he was gone she stood where he had left her, her hands to her breasts, and felt that at last life had meaning. She was so happy that she felt there was nothing more for her to ask. She was a very innocent woman. She had been persuaded that they could see one another occasionally, and, sharing this secret, continue to act as though they were the casual, happy-go-lucky friends they had been before. It never occurred to her that nature could take a hand in the matter. Sex had not been an important matter in May's life, and her relations with her husband had been perfunctory. But now a revolution took place in her. Her imagination would not let her rest, and shocking, enchanting dreams troubled her nights. The touch of Dick's hand sent the blood rushing to her heart. The sound of his voice on the telephone made her knees wobble beneath her. She desired him as much as she knew he desired her. Sometimes he would look at her, and the passion in his eyes possessed her with all the violence of carnal possession. She knew now what it was that had from the first attracted her to him, his overpowering virility. It called to her with a terrifying force, and she exulted in it. And because she knew that she had the strength never to yield to her desire, she did not even attempt to curb it. She gloried in it. It made her feel more alive than ever before. She had a sense of triumph because she could feel something she had never thought to feel. She was ashamed of nothing now. She would stand in her room, stark naked, and look at herself in the glass and revel in the beauty of her slim figure, her breasts small and virginal, and think of Dick's body warm against hers and his arms round her. And she would laugh because everyone thought her cold. But it was not only from sexual desire that she loved Dick. She felt herself so much at home with him, so confidentially at ease. It was balm to her soul merely to be in the same room with him. He was the only person in the world with whom she was not a little shy. Thus things went on. May's conscience was tranquil because after that first time when Dick told her of his love, he had never even kissed her. Though they had not agreed upon it, by mutual consent, as it were, they took care not to speak of their feelings for each other, and they never said a thing to one another that anyone might not have heard. Of course, what made it easier was that May's work at the hospital kept her much in London, and that when they met at Graveney, it was almost always in the company of others. They could have counted on the fingers of one hand the occasions during that period on which they had been alone together. There was one thing of which May was quite certain, that there was no one at Graveney Holt, neither Jane with her sharp tongue and sharp eyes, nor that Austrian girl the Hendersons had given refuge to, who had the remotest suspicion that Dick was anything more to her than her father-in-law's agent. But when Roger telegraphed that he would soon be coming home, they felt that the situation they must face was insufferable. It revolted May to receive him with the pretense that she was still his loving wife. She knew that after a sexual abstinence that had lasted so long he would want a normal gratification. He was a man, young and strong, with healthy appetites, and though sex had never absorbed him, he had his natural share of desire, and he needed to satisfy it as he needed to satisfy his desire for food at dinner time. May had never quite overcome the embarrassment with which the sexual act had filled her, and now she felt that she could not possibly submit to it. The thought disgusted her, and to commit it with him seemed grossly indecent. With Dick it would have been natural, inevitable, sacred. She had an inkling that Dick was thinking of it too. His eyes were worried, and he, so frank and open as a rule, was unusually silent, as though he were brooding over a subject he could not bring himself to discuss. A day or two before Roger was due, lying in wait to catch him when he came out of the general's study, she stopped him. "What do you say to my coming to your house this afternoon? I think we ought to have a talk." "That's okay by me," he answered. She had been there 2 or 3 times with Mrs. Henderson to see that his maid of all work kept it clean and tidy, but she had never been to it alone before, nor of late at all. It was a pleasant house, with a walled garden, on the outskirts of the village, but it was large for a single man, and Dick only used 2 of the rooms. He ate in the living room, comfortable with the technical books of his trade and mystery stories, radio, pipes, tobacco, gramophone records, papers, magazines, and all the litter of an untidy bachelor. It had a pleasant, lived-in, cozy feel. "You know what I wanted to talk about," she said when she sat down in one of the big, shabby chairs. "I can guess." He smiled, but his smile was wan. "I thought I could go through with it. It seemed possible when Roger was away and wouldn't be back for ages. But now I know I can't. God knows I don't want you to. I love you so much, May." "I know. I love you too. I can't pretend, and I don't believe Roger would want me to. Wouldn't it be better to tell him the truth? I'm all for the truth. Heaven knows I've given it a good trial. How much in love with you is he? They spoke elliptically, leaping over intermediate remarks, for they understood one another so perfectly that you would have fancied they followed one another's thought without the need of speech. I don't think he's ever asked himself. He's taken it for granted that a husband loves his wife and a wife loves her husband. I owe a great deal to him. He's an awfully good chap. It's beastly to play him a dirty trick like this. I know it is. He's a reasonable man. He'll know we couldn't help ourselves. You know I haven't a bob except what I earn here. I've got about £200 in the bank. Does that matter? Not as far as I'm concerned. I don't see that we've got anything to reproach ourselves with. Of course you know what you're giving up. This place and everything that goes with it. It's a prison. It stifles me. He knew the idea that was in her mind, though she had made no mention of it. Do you think he'd let you go? He can't keep me against my will. I don't think he'd want to. That's not in his nature. I suppose it would have been better for you if I'd never come here. Oh, don't say that. It's not true. He pondered. I think you ought to know what you're in for. Poverty. I've been poor before. It won't make a very pretty story, the son's wife running off with her father-in-law's agent. Do you care? Not a damn, he laughed. Neither do I, she laughed back. Come and sit on my knee. God damn it, let's have something we can blame ourselves for. She moved over to him and put her arms round his neck. For the second time he kissed her. I feel so intolerably happy, she murmured. They talked it over and decided that she should ask Roger to allow himself to be divorced, and if he refused they would force him to divorce her by going away together. And now she had done what they had arranged, only to receive the shattering blow that in a few hours the country would be at war. What was there to do now except what she had told Roger she was willing to do? Wait. She smiled when she thought how wrong Roger was when he imagined that she could change. It was funny how such an intelligent man could be so stupid. The dinner bell rang and May roused herself from her reflections. The maid had got her bath ready. May undressed and stepped into it. She inhaled the pleasant smell of bath salts. I shan't have luxuries like this when I'm married to Dick, she chuckled. Roger drove back to London after dinner. Next day at dawn the Germans invaded Poland, and 48 hours later, on the 3rd of September, Britain was at war. It was Sunday. There was not yet a hint of autumn in the air, and the sun shone radiant in a cloudless sky. As you stood on the terrace and gazed at the peaceful scene, so fresh, so green, so mild, so amiable, it was almost impossible to realize that for hours already tanks had been thundering across the Polish frontier and bombers dropping their hideous loads on the defenseless capital. The bells of the little church in the village, the church where generations of Hendersons lay buried, called the parishioners to morning service with their familiar peal. They had a friendly, welcoming sound which, as never before, comforted the anguished heart. Mrs. Henderson and May alone went. They prayed for peace. Dick, as was usual, came to lunch, and in the course of the afternoon May found an opportunity to tell him of her conversation with Roger. He listened attentively. I see his point, he said when she had finished. I can wait, darling. I can wait too. It may take a year to smash him. It can't take longer than that, and we've got all our lives before us. I'm glad I told him. I'm glad everything is above board. He took her hand and gave it a little squeeze. They were happy to be together. They did not even need to talk very much. They had so much confidence in each other that there was no occasion for the common endearments of lovers, and their intimacy was such that they found refreshment in one another's silence. But it was a sad day. No one had the heart to play tennis. They could talk of nothing but the war. They listened to the radio and commented eagerly on every scrap of news they heard. They got Paris and tried to get Warsaw. At 6 they gathered together to listen to the King's speech. Big Ben struck the hour. It filled the great hall of Graveney Holt with its reverberation. The speech began with these words. In this grave hour, perhaps the most fateful in our history, I send to every household of my peoples, both at home and overseas, this message, spoken with the same depths of feeling for each one of you, as if I were able to cross your threshold and speak to you myself." May and Mrs. Henderson began to cry, and Jane nervously painted her scarlet lips. "The task will be hard. There may be dark days ahead, and war can no longer be confined to the battlefield. But we can only do the right as we see the right, and reverently commit our cause to God. If one and all we keep resolutely faithful to it, ready for whatever service or sacrifice it may demand, then with God's help we shall prevail. May He bless and keep us all." For a moment there was an awed silence. "God save the King," said the general. "It's no good, I must have a drink after that," cried Ian, his great booming voice husky. "If I weren't the typical strong, silent Englishman, I think I should probably have a good cry now." It relieved the tension. "No one knows what it is to be married to a damned fool like that," exclaimed Jane. "But about once a year he does have a bright idea. For God's sake give me a whiskey and soda, Ian, and don't drown it with soda, or I'll kill you." The General and Ian wanted to offer their services at once, and so started off for London bright and early next morning. Ian, before his marriage, had been in the Grenadiers and proposed to join his old regiment. Mrs. Henderson, Jane, and May followed a little later. Mrs. Henderson had a plan, and since she thought she might need Roger's help, phoned him to ask if he could possibly look in at Jane's house between 5 and 6. But when they had been gone about an hour, Dora asked Jim if he would drive her up to town. She was worried by her position as an enemy alien and wished to go to the Home Office to find out for herself where she actually stood. "Oh, you'll be all right," he said. "Father'll settle all that." "Your father's got more important things to do than to fuss about me," she insisted. "Please." He had looked forward to spending the day alone with her. "It seems rather rough on Tommy to leave him all alone," he said. "Oh, he'll be all right. He can amuse himself," she answered a trifle impatiently. Graveney Holt was only 10 miles from the sea. "I thought we might go and have a bathe. It'll be beastly in London in this heat. I must go. Really. If you won't take me, I shall go by train." "Oh, all right," he smiled. "Of course I'll take you." She slipped her arm through his. She had got her way. "Couldn't we dine together and come down after dinner?" Jim gave a little gasp of delight, and his face lit up. "Come on then, we'll have a lark." When they arrived in London, she told him that she wished to go about her business alone. She thought it probable that she would have to wait about for hours, and would not hear of it when he told her that he would be only too glad to wait with her. She was quite firm. "It would get on my nerves. It would only make me impatient to think I was trying your patience." He suggested then that she should go to Jane's when she was through, and he would wait for her there. "I shall have to tell Mother that we've come up to town and shan't be back till late. I don't think I shall go to your sister's. She doesn't like me." "Oh, what nonsense. Of course she likes you." Dora shook her pretty head with decision. "That's what you think," she said tartly. "I know." They arranged to meet at 6 in St. James's Park at Queen Anne's Gate and go to a newsreel before dinner. She left him with a smile and a jaunty wave of the hand. Jim watched her thread her way through the crowd in Parliament Street till he lost sight of her. He liked her gallant carriage and the energy of her walk. Because he had nothing to do, he went to the National Gallery, but finding that the pictures had been put away, went to the club to which he had recently been elected. He found no one there he knew. He read the early editions of the evening papers, and then the news on the tape. He lunched. Then, over a cup of coffee in the smoking room, he surrendered himself to his reflections. They were none too pleasant. He hated war. He thought it senseless and criminal. He had long declared that he would take no part in it if it broke out, and now the moment had come to show that he had meant what he said. He knew that a lot of the fellows who had thought with him, who had been so loud in their denunciations of the folly of war, would be carried away by the wave of patriotism that was sweeping the country, and cravenly forsaking their principles, hastened to join up. He would only despise himself if he followed their example. They would say he was a coward. It wasn't true. If they only knew how much more courage it needed to stand up alone and friendless against common opinion than to stand side by side with your comrades and let yourself be shot at. They would say he was soft and feared the hardship and discomfort, the cold, the wet, the intolerable boredom of trench life. That wasn't true either. It wasn't very pleasant to see the finger of scorn pointed at you, but it was much worse to lose your soul alive. Now was the time to prove what stuff he was made of. He would be ashamed to surrender now. His self-respect was at stake, and whatever the consequences, he must follow the dictates of his conscience. He loved his father and mother, and he knew that his decision must cause them bitter pain. Jane would mock him, and Tommy would be aghast. He didn't quite know how Roger would take it. Oh yes, he did. With icy disapproval. Oh well, none of that could be helped. He must put up with whatever came. He was in for a bad time all right. Thank God he had the strength to endure it. He had made up his mind, and nothing that anyone could say should make him swerve from the clear path of duty. You would never have thought it possible for that pleasant young face to assume an expression of such stern determination. Sooner or later there must be a showdown, he said to himself. And the sooner the better. He made up his mind at the first opportunity to tell them all what he had resolved, and to clarify his thoughts sat down at a desk and wrote them out as succinctly as he could. When he had finished he glanced at the clock. His mother should be at Jane's now, and he might just as well go there, and wait till it was time to meet Dora. His eyes softened as he thought of her, and his moody look grew tender. She understood him, and sympathized with him, and believed in him. Nothing mattered really as long as he didn't lose her. He loved her with all his heart. If she'd have him, he'd marry her tomorrow. She was beautiful. But she was more than that. She was good and clever and brave. It was not only love he felt for her, it was deep respect. Though she was but a year younger than himself, he knew there was much he could learn from her. She made him feel very humble. He left the club, got into his car, and driving down St. James's Street crossed the park. Jane had a little Georgian house in Westminster, close to the Abbey, and with her infallible sense of unfitness, had furnished it in a style of aggressive modernity, so that her drawing room with its chromium plate, cubist pictures and fantastic draperies, looked more like the waiting room of a beauty parlor than a room in which any human being could take his ease. She was dressed to suit her setting, and with her marcelled and dyed hair, her painted face and her monocle would have made a caricaturist throw up his hands in despair. His malice could not have made her more absurd than she had made herself. She was the only person there whom the events of the last 3 days appeared not to have touched. Mrs. Henderson and May were subdued. They had been to Westminster Abbey and were still shaken by the sight, tragic and yet heartening, of the many people silently praying. The General and Ian, who had just arrived, were having a drink. Jim told his mother how he chanced to be in London, and added that he was taking Dora out to dinner. "I'm glad," she said, smiling at him fondly. "Sometimes I'm afraid it's very dull for her in the country. It'll do her good to see a bit of life for a change." "What happened to you at the War Office?" Jim asked Ian. "Need you ask?" answered Jane before he could speak. "Did you ever see anyone look more like a bear with a sore head? Can you wonder?" he exploded. "I went and told them I wanted to rejoin my old regiment, and some damned little whippersnapper told me I was too old. Me. Too old at 40. I'm in the prime of life. I tried to see Horbelisha," said the General, "but he was busy, and I only saw his private secretary. I told him I didn't mind what I did as long as I did something. I can't say he was very encouraging. This is going to be a young man's war," he said. "But damn it, I am a young man," Ian boomed. "I tell you this, I'm going to get into it somehow. Roger ought to be able to wangle something for me." Mrs. Henderson turned to her husband. "George dear, May and I have been talking things over, and with your approval I want to take some evacuated children. If we made the large drawing room and the ballroom into dormitories, I think we could accommodate 50 or 60. Of course it'll be an upset, he said, but in these times we mustn't think of that. It'll give you something to do, my dear, and what's more, something very much worthwhile. May and I can look after them, and I'm sure Dora'll be only too glad to give a hand. You know how competent she is. She's that all right. Mrs. Henderson went on to explain in detail what arrangements she and May had devised, and they were still discussing them when Roger came in. Ian attacked him at once. "Look here, Roger, I want to have a word with you. Give me a drink, old boy. I know exactly what you're going to say. You want to get back into uniform, and so does Father. You must have patience. Before we're through with this show, every man and woman in this country will be wanted. Don't make any mistake, it's going to be a long and terrible business." He looked very soldierly in his uniform, a fine and upright figure, and there was a cheerful composure in his manner that inspired confidence. He gave May a friendly little nod, and she smiled faintly in return. He sat down beside his mother, and as soon as she was sure of his attention, she told him of her plan. He made 1 or 2 suggestions and promised to find out what she must do to put it into effect. May knew he must have important matters to think about and much to do, and she could not help admiring the kindly patience with which he listened to his mother's long-winded explanations. He was a good son and a good friend. He was the sort of man you could rely on, but he was the sort of man you couldn't love. May had entered into Mrs. Henderson's scheme with eagerness, not only because she was anxious to do whatever she could in the emergency, but also because it offered an escape from a situation that had caused her disquiet. Their flat was small. There were a living room and a dining room. There were 2 rooms behind the kitchen for the cook and the maid, a bedroom with twin beds for Roger and her, and a smaller one that had been intended for the use of the expected baby. They had taken the flat with the idea that it would do for 2 or 3 years, and when other babies made it necessary to have more space, they would move into a larger one. But no baby had come, and Roger had turned the extra room into a study where he could keep his books and papers and receive visitors whom it was imprudent for him to see at the War Office. Of course this room could be turned into a bedroom, but it might be that he would need it now more than ever. Moreover, she felt a certain embarrassment at suggesting that they should no longer share the same room. It was an awkward thing to do, and Jane, who liked to look in on her when she had nothing better to do, would soon find out what she had done, and then the whole family would know that there was a change in their relations. It was part of the spirit of her bargain with Roger that the arrangement he had agreed to should remain a secret between them. Mrs. Henderson's plan solved the difficulty. May would be living at Graveney for the duration of the war, and Roger could have the flat to himself. "Oh, and there's something else, Roger," said Mrs. Henderson when she had finished with the children. "I wanted to talk to you about Dora. She's afraid she'll be interned, but there's no risk of that really, is there? They'll round up the German men, but I don't suppose they'll bother about the women. She's not German, she's Austrian. Your father and I are prepared to vouch for her. The difficulty is that you live within 5 miles of," he hesitated for an instant, "of a military objective." "You needn't be so mysterious about it, Roger," said Jim, a trifle acidly. "Everyone in the county knows that you've taken over the land to build a secret airfield there." Roger shrugged his shoulders. "I suppose that's so. But we're going to take damned good care that the Germans don't, and I don't suppose the authorities will want aliens living in the immediate neighborhood." He turned again to his mother. "What do you know about this girl?" Mrs. Henderson told him Dora's moving story. "With all those children in the house, she'll be invaluable. You know Jane isn't much use at that sort of thing." "None," interjected Jane. "And May and I couldn't possibly manage alone." "What do you think of this girl, May?" he asked. "Dora's a good worker, and she's willing to put her hand to anything. She couldn't dislike the Germans more. No one could be more anti-Nazi than she is. Mrs. Henderson went on. Her stories of the way the Germans treated those poor Austrians when they seized the country simply make your blood boil. What's her name? Asked Roger. Dora Friedberg. I'll just make a note of it in case of need, he said, taking out his notebook and scribbling in it. In your place I wouldn't worry just yet. When the regulations for aliens are issued, Father can go and talk it over with the chief constable. If he guarantees her, I expect it'll be all right. Shall you be going over to France, Roger? Asked the general. I'm trying to wangle it. I certainly don't want to spend the war sitting in an office in Whitehall. What do you think's going to happen in Poland? The Poles were very confident when I left. My own impression is that they can't hold out for more than 3 months. No longer than that? Well, that'll be something. It'll give us time to look round and get a bit more ready than we are now. He turned to Jim, and with the affectionate look in his eyes that always came into them when he talked with any member of his own family, jokingly asked him, "Well, old boy, how'd you like the prospect of forming fours in a Baroque square?" Jim did not answer for a moment. The time had come, and it seemed to him that his hands and feet had suddenly gone cold. He went very white. He glanced round the room, and because he was nervous his eyes were hostile when they met Roger's. "I don't like it at all," he said deliberately. "I'm not going to do it." Mrs. Henderson smothered an exclamation and looked anxiously at her husband. He stared at Jim as though he couldn't believe his ears. Jane, her lips compressed in disapproval, took out her lipstick and began to paint them. Roger knew nothing of Jim's pacifist views. He had not seen him for some time, and for one reason or another no one had thought fit to tell him. He gave Jim a quick, puzzled glance, and then after a moment's pause laughed. "You'll have to, old boy. You'll be called up, and you'd much better go of your own accord. It looks better, you know." Jim did not move. It was with something like scorn on his face that he answered. He was sure of himself now. "I think war is horrible and senseless. What did the last war do? Killed millions of men and left as many men halt, lame and blind. And what for? To start again after 20 years of misery and unrest. If you like to be such damned fools as to fight, you can. I'm not going to." No one spoke for a while. Roger looked at his brother reflectively. "I didn't know you were a pacifist, Jim," he said as casually as he might have said that he didn't know his brother was a vegetarian. "Well, you know now." Roger turned to the general. "Did you know about this, Father?" he asked with an air of half-amused indulgence. The general made a little gesture of helpless bewilderment. "I knew that Jim went about saying he was a pacifist. I didn't take it very seriously. I thought it was just a lot of undergraduate nonsense, and if war came he'd forget it." Jim grew angry. His brother's manner, his father's words, making him seem like a naughty, troublesome child, deeply affronted him. But he controlled himself. "You were wrong, Father," he said, rising to his feet and speaking with all the earnestness of which he was capable. "I think that war is wicked. At Oxford I signed a solemn declaration that if it broke out, I would take no part in it. You despise me because I won't break my word. I should despise myself if I did." "No one despises you, old boy," said Roger. "We're only trying to understand." His voice was conciliatory, almost caressing, and there was a loving kindness in his eyes. May, watching him, recognized that look. They were attached to one another with an unusual love, the members of that family, and though you married into it, though they were fond and indulgent, you remained, in some strange way, outside it. They never felt completely themselves except in one another's company. Jim frowned. It would have been easier if his brother had upbraided him. He could have coped with bitter words, but that gentle tone, the deep affection in those eyes so like his own, nearly broke him. He clenched his hands, but when he spoke he hardly knew his own voice. "I believe in God. I believe in peace and goodwill to all men. I believe that if humanity is to advance we must tear hate out of our hearts and put love in its place. This isn't the moment to hesitate. It's now that we've got to make our stand, we who hate war and bear witness to our faith. Roger answered with a deep seriousness equal to his own. We all hate war, old boy, but we think our honor is at stake. Poland, Jim cried scornfully. It was Belgium last time. What will it be next? Afghanistan? Ecuador? Bunk. And we think our freedom is at stake. We're fighting for everything that makes life worth living. Jim interrupted him hotly. We're going to make the world safe for democracy a second time. Really, Roger? I thought you were intelligent. Meanwhile, Ian, redder in the face than ever, had been puffing and blowing and now could restrain himself no longer. But look here, Jim, if the Germans start invading this country, do you mean to say you're not going to resist? Jim turned on him angrily. Good God, Ian, don't bring up all those stale arguments over again. We're sick to death of them. No, I'm not. And if they come to my house and take everything that's in it, I'll let them take it. And if they try to rape my sister, before he could finish, Jane broke in with a shrill cackle of laughter. Don't bother about that, Jim. I shall know how to deal with that perfectly. He flushed. He gave Jane a piteous look, and his voice was not quite steady when he continued. Do you think I like to find myself in this position? Do you think I like disappointing you and angering you? It would be so much easier to toe the line and put my principles in my pocket. But I can't. I tell you I can't. They can beat me, they can put me in prison, they can stand me up against a wall and shoot me. I will not serve in the army. I will not kill. I will not do anything to help others to kill. No one's going to put you up against a wall and shoot you, old boy, said Roger mildly. You'll have to go before a tribunal and state your reasons for refusing military service. And if they're accepted, you'll be put to some work unconnected with the war. That I'm quite willing to do. Roger gazed at his brother, and in his harassed eyes was now a deep compassion. I'm afraid you're in for a rather rough time, old boy. I can't help that. I've got to do my duty as I see it. We've all got to do that. Roger took a cigarette case from his pocket and took out a cigarette. He tapped one end against the silver. He seemed lost in thought. Is there anything more you want to say to me? Jim asked aggressively. Nothing. Then I'll go. I've got to meet Dora. Good night, Mother. Good night, Father. He glanced at his father and for a moment, staring, stood stock still. He was as taken aback as though someone for no reason had suddenly struck him. Tears, scalding tears, were trickling down that worn, lined face. It was such a dreadful sight that Jim gasped. Then, with a hoarse cry of anguish, he flung out of the room. For a while no one spoke. I'm afraid this is a bad blow for you, Father, said Roger at last. Mrs. Henderson got up and sat beside her husband. She took his handkerchief out of his pocket and put it in his hand. He took it and dried his eyes. He tried to laugh. I'm sorry to make such an exhibition of myself. Don't take it too hard, darling, she said. I'm so ashamed. I don't know what I did wrong. The boy couldn't have turned out like that if I hadn't been somehow to blame. He sighed. The world of today is too much for me. I've lived too long. It's about time I made way for you, Roger, my boy. There was another silence, and then Mrs. Henderson spoke. The boy's got a right to his own opinions. After all, that's one of the things we're fighting for. I don't suppose it was easy for him to say the things he did just now, and I'm afraid he's dreadfully unhappy. He's doing what he thinks is right. I beseech you all not to make it harder for him. Are we expected to treat him as if he was a damned fine fellow? Asked Jane acidly. You would never have thought that Mrs. Henderson's face could assume an expression of such sternness. Jane lowered her eyes before her mother's imperious gaze. You're expected to treat him as my dearly loved son. The laws of England give him the right to do what he feels is his duty. No one in my family shall blame him. I will allow none of you by anything you say or anything you do to hurt him. For Jim drove through the quiet streets of Westminster, crossed Victoria Street, and parked his car at the entrance to St. James's Park. He went in. It was early and Dora wouldn't be there yet, but that was just as well, for he was shattered, and he needed a little while to compose himself. He longed for her. He had never wanted her as he wanted her now. He knew he was doing the right thing, but he was wretched and she would comfort him. She was wise and good. It had been a great happiness to him to discover that she was in complete agreement with him in his opinions. She was indeed as ardent a pacifist as himself. Though like him she knew the actual horror of war only from hearsay, she had the personal experience of its bitter aftermath. She had seen the despair of industrious workers who could get no work and had to sit by while their children died of starvation. She had seen the gray faces of the gaunt and hungry. She had seen the bitterness that warped the souls of those for whom tomorrow must be as hopeless as today. She had seen the brave grow cowardly, the generous mean, and the honest deceitful. She had seen hatred grow up in the hearts of those who had nothing for those who had a pittance. She had seen class venomously attacking class. She had seen virtue perish, and all that lent grace to life, and the values that give man his dignity, honor, truth, loyalty, uprightness, made the mock of fools and scoundrels. And what had brought it about? A stupid, senseless war, a war brought about by greedy, ambitious, and scrupulous knaves. The misery of half a continent was the price of defeat. And what was the reward of victory? Profiteers had made fortunes. Night clubs had raked in money hand over fist. Restaurants had done thriving business. Motor car manufacturers had sold a multitude of cars. Unemployment reached staggering proportions. The miners starved. The doles sapped the independence and the spirit of those who found in it a miserable subsistence. The moneyed wasted their substance in witless dissipation. It seemed as though the only sensible thing was to have a good time, and the only foolish one to count the cost. You were honest and sober, chaste and decent. Oh God, what a bloody prig! To take serious things seriously. Oh my pet, how shy making! Virtue and valor Christ, what a crashing bore! Flippancy took the place of wit, and cynicism of wisdom. Vice was no longer shameful, sloth abject, and intemperance discreditable. To be a gigolo was an honorable profession, and if a kept woman gave good enough parties, half the world would scramble for invitations to them. That was what the war had brought to England, an upper class dead to its responsibilities, a middle class that had renounced its standards, and a working class, ill-housed, ill-fed, and resentful. Victors and vanquished, they had both been defeated. And now, fools and knaves, they had blundered into war again. No matter what they thought of him, no matter the pain and the anguish, the disgrace and humiliation, Jim swore that he for his part would be true to his conviction. It happened that he was walking by the ornamental water, and suddenly growing conscious of the pretty charming scene, he stopped to look at it. An engaging smile broke on his lips as his eyes fell on the two pelicans that were waddling on the grass with an air of self-importance. Ducks of bright plumage were swimming on the water, and one of them dived down every now and then, and you saw its tail flutter jauntily on the surface. Mothers with their children playing about them were sitting on the public benches. Here and there on a chair, reading a book, was a tired-looking woman. Jim sauntered on. There was an old gentleman on a bench reading an evening paper. A couple of soldiers in khaki strolled along, and a Canadian trooper asked him the way to Parliament Street. The trees were in full leaf, as yet untouched by approaching autumn, and the flower beds were gay with dahlias. There was a peculiar charm in that little park in the middle of the city. It was very graceful, rural, and at the same time urbane. And to a well-read youth like Jim it had a pleasant aroma of the 18th century. Here Tom Jones had taken the air with Lady Bellaston, and Lady Teazle had listened to the blandishments of Joseph Surface. And here his own ancestors, Hendersons in tie wigs and embroidered coats, their womenfolk in hoops, with powdered hair, had hobnobbed with the great world of fashion when they came to London on their periodical visits. Jim's heart sank when he thought that destruction must inevitably visit that happy pleasance. They said that only those who had known London before the last war knew the enchantment of life. What would they say if they were unfortunate enough to live through the next? He sought in one comprehensive look to take in what his eyes beheld, so that it might be a permanent possession that nothing could erase from his sensibility. Its beauty rested him, but he looked at his watch. It was still early, and he rambled on. The air was delicious on that warm summer evening, and there was something stimulating in the vague, dull roar of the city north and south of the park. It was as exciting in its way as when things, momentous things, are happening behind a closed door and you await the outcome of you know not what. Suddenly he caught sight of Dora. She was sitting on a bench talking to a woman. He was surprised, for to the best of his belief she didn't know a soul in London. The woman was talking rapidly and emphatically, and Dora, her eyes fixed on her, was nodding every now and then as though to show she followed and understood. She was so much absorbed that she did not see him till he came close enough to hear that the stranger was talking German. It was the woman who noticed him first, and she abruptly stopped speaking. Dora gave a start, and the color flushed her cheeks. "Oh, Jim, I didn't expect you yet. I never heard you come up. It made me jump." The woman looked at him for a moment, and it struck him that her gaze was strangely cold. Then she got up, gave Dora a curt nod, and with brisk steps walked away. "Who is that?" he asked as he sat down beside her. "I've no idea. She was sitting on the bench when I came. She saw I was a foreigner and began to talk to me. She's a refugee. She told me her story. It was pitiful, and the tragic part is that one can do nothing to help her. I felt so sorry for her. She looked a pretty determined sort of woman. I expect she'll make out all right. Give me a cigarette, will you? What have you been doing all day?" "Nothing very much." His tone was so despondent that she gave him a look. He was pale and drawn. "Is anything the matter? You look dreadfully tired." "I'm all in. I told them. That I wasn't going to join up, I mean. They were all there. It was awfully painful. My father cried." "Why?" she asked tartly. "He thinks it's such a disgrace. He's ashamed. He doesn't begin to understand my point of view." She was silent for a moment, and her face grew sullen. He went on. "You mustn't think too hardly of him. He's an old man, and we've been in the army for generations. You see, he thinks if you're not a soldier, you might just as well be a chimney sweep. And when there's a war on, he can't conceive of one's not moving heaven and earth to get in." "Was your brother angry with you?" "Not angry exactly. Kind with the tolerant kindness with which you'd treat someone who was just a bit dotty." Jim gave a mournful chuckle. "I don't think life is going to be very pleasant at home." Dora gave her shoulders a shrug that might have meant anything. "Did your mother say anything to your brother about me?" she asked. A smile broke on his lips. He was glad to talk about her. "Yes. He made a note of your name. He says it'll be all right, and I'm sure it will. It would be monstrous to intern you. After all, you're not German, you're Austrian, and the rotten deal you've had entitles you to some consideration. The fact remains that I'm an enemy alien. You needn't be, you know," he smiled. His meaning was plain, and she made a slight gesture, but what it signified he couldn't have said. He took her hand, and she let him hold it, but did not speak. A passer-by looked at them inquisitively and smiled as he went on. Jim waited till he was out of earshot. "Darling, won't you marry me?" She withdrew her hand and looked down. There was the shadow of a frown between her eyes. "If you were my wife, you'd be a British subject, and then the authorities would have nothing to say." She seemed to hesitate for an instant. She gave him a little smile with her lips, but her eyes were grave. "You're sweet, Jim." "No, I can't marry you." "Why not?" "I love you. You know how passionately I love you. I thought you cared for me. It wouldn't be fair to your father and mother. They've been so kind to me. I couldn't repay their kindness like that. They'd hate your marrying me. I don't believe it. They want me to get married. Perhaps. But not to a penniless, middle-class foreigner. Even if she had half a dozen babies, they'd resent her." Jim sighed. He couldn't expect Dora, with her cleverness, not to have discovered that his father, now Roger had failed him, looked to his second son to produce the heir on whom his heart was set. He realized that a high-spirited, idealistic girl was justified in disliking to be treated like a broodmare. "I need you so badly, darling. I'm going to have a rotten time, make no mistake about that. I can bear it. But I need you. It would only make it harder for you if you had an Austrian wife. I wouldn't care. Then they couldn't take you away from me. Oh, Dora, say yes. I promise you'll never regret it." She looked at him with her fine, candid eyes and leaning towards him lightly kissed his cheek. "Don't let's decide now. Let's think it over. I don't want them to take me away. You can be very sure of that. It wouldn't suit my book at all. If there's any danger of that, then yes, let's get married." She said it so lightly, so charmingly, that his heart was uplifted. "I've got half a mind to denounce you as a German spy so as to force your hand," he said gaily. She laughed. "That wouldn't be very nice of you. You might say you don't positively dislike me. You're more nearly a civilized being than anyone else I've met in this country. I wouldn't be surprised to discover that I was madly in love with you. My angel." She put up her hands in protest against the passionate embrace she foresaw. "Not here. It's really too public. Didn't you say you were going to take me to a newsreel?" They got up and strolled out of the park. As they came to the gate, a newsboy ran past with a late edition of the Star. "Paper! Paper!" he shouted. Liner Athenia sunk. "Paper! Paper!" Mrs. Henderson went to work without delay, for it was urgent in as short a time as possible to get the house ready to receive the children she designed to take. Everyone expected London to be heavily bombed, and the hospitals were instructed to make preparations to accommodate several thousand casualties. Such of the sick as could be moved were sent to the country, and those who could without danger be discharged were returned to their homes. There was an air raid warning on the first day of the war, and great numbers of people, many in fun, many in fear, the majority because they thought it was expected of them, hurried to the inadequate shelters. The authorities were pressing for the evacuation of children, and the trains out of London were crowded with them. It was hard at such short notice to find suitable accommodation for that daily stream. Mrs. Henderson cleared the ballroom of its furniture and placed cots, hurried down from London, in 2 rows along the walls. She emptied the great drawing room and made it into a playroom, and the big dining room, used only for large parties, was turned into a refectory. That left the hall, decorated by William Kent, and one of the show pieces of the house, a smaller dining room, a smaller drawing room, and the library, its carving by Grinling Gibbons, for their own use. On Roger's advice, she had decided to start with 30 children, and they came in 2 batches, one of 12 and the next of 18. They came from Stepney, and they were from 4 to 12 years old. Some were decent enough, the children of respectable working men, but others only too shamefully betrayed their parents' debasing poverty. They were ragged and lousy. They had to be washed and scrubbed, and clothes had to be provided for them. The little ones were easy enough to deal with, but some of the older ones, especially the boys, were hard to control. They were of dirty habits, foul-mouthed and willfully destructive. 2 or 3 at first seemed quite unmanageable. They broke whatever was breakable, and with eager little feet mischievously trampled on the flower beds in the garden, so that not a flower was left standing. Some had never sat at a table before to eat their meals, but had eaten them on the floor, and when they were made to sit at table in obstinate rage, threw everything within reach on the ground. But perhaps those most difficult to deal with were the homesick. They felt frightened and lonely in the big house in the depths of the country, and hankered for the noisy, squalid streets of the London slums. Then there were the mothers who came down for the day to see their children. Some were glad to have them out of harm's way, and though they missed them could not but see that to live a healthy life in the country was good for them. They felt instinctively that they could entrust them to the kind lady who spoke so nicely. But others were more difficult. They were dissatisfied with the plain, wholesome food Mrs. Henderson gave the children and complained that they were starved. It was a grievance that she provided fresh milk instead of canned. Mean, they called it. They were convinced that she was getting money for the children's keep from the government and didn't try to conceal their belief that she was making a good thing out of it. They resented the neat clothes she had bought for them. It was an aspersion on their ability to clothe their children decently, and because they were all dressed alike, anyone would have thought they was charity. Nor did they hold with all them baths Mrs. Henderson insisted on their having. They'll only catch their death of cold, poor little things, they protested. Several indeed insisted on taking their children away. Others came in their place, and it was a toss-up if they would be nice and well-behaved or little ruffians bent on making trouble. But in a few weeks, by a combination of firmness and kindliness, Mrs. Henderson succeeded in establishing an influence even over the most obstreperous. Her tender heart was glad when she saw how with good food to eat and good air to breathe they filled out, and their cheeks grew rosy. The most acid of the mothers were obliged to acknowledge that they seemed to be doing all right, and were ready to admit in a funny shamefaced way that the old girl wasn't Alf bad really. It was a triumph for Mrs. Henderson when a fierce, hard-featured woman, the mother of 6, said to her, "You're a lady and no mistake, and I don't mind who hears me say it." But it was hard work. The men servants had gone, the butler to drive a truck, and the 2 footmen into training, so that only the women servants were left. By the time Mrs. Henderson, May and Dora had tucked the children up in their cots for the night, they were exhausted. The older ones went to the village school, and so were kept out of mischief for some part of the day. May and Dora took it in turns to look after the others. Dora, as Mrs. Henderson had predicted, was invaluable. She was more severe than either May or Mrs. Henderson could bring themselves to be, and Mrs. Henderson had to remind her once or twice that they were only children, children who had never had a chance to learn, and so too much could not be expected of them. But there was no doubt that she knew how to keep them in order. They did not like her as much as they liked Mrs. Henderson or May, but they respected her. They soon learnt that when she told them to do anything she meant it should be done. A curious incident occurred soon after the outbreak of war. Jim was looking at an illustrated paper and saw a picture of the staff of the German embassy leaving London. He showed it to Dora. "Look at that," he said. "Isn't that the old girl you were talking to in St. James's Park the other evening when we were up in town?" It was a tall, dark woman with marked features. Dora gave the picture a glance. "I shouldn't think so," she said casually. "That woman said she was a refugee. It's the same hat, and she has the same hard look. I wonder if she really was a refugee." "Well, if she was trying to get anything out of me she didn't succeed," Dora answered with her frank smile. Jim thought no more about it. But when his father came down for the week-end, and just as a matter of curiosity, he thought he would show him the picture, he couldn't find the paper. He wondered where it had got to. The general, despairing of getting anything better to do, was working at the central office of the Red Cross, and only came down for weekends. He treated Jim as kindly as he had always done, but avoided being alone with him. And Jim, his nerves on edge, felt that now and then his father's eyes rested on him with a sort of unhappy perplexity. But when he deliberately looked at him, his father looked away. May and Mrs. Henderson talked to him with invariable cordiality, but of indifferent things, and never mentioned the subject that divided them. Once he tried to broach it with his mother. "Oh, Jim, let's not discuss it," she said. "Presumably you've made up your mind, and nothing I can say will change it. Am I making you very wretched?" "Yes. I'm sorry." One Sunday morning when they were at breakfast, he found a letter on his plate. He opened it, and taking out its contents showed it to them. "The first white feather," he said. The general and Mrs. Henderson stared at it aghast. May in embarrassment looked down, and Dora gazed at him with a singular expression in her blue eyes. Jim examined the postmark. "Not very far from home," he remarked. "I wonder which of our kind friends had the thought." With a smile on his lips, he put the feather in the buttonhole of his coat. The general rose from the table and walked out of the room. The others finished breakfast in silence. In due course he received a summons from the local tribunal that had been established to hear the pleas of those who had been called up and claimed exemption from military service. He had courage, and it was without fear of the ordeal before him that on the appointed morning he drove to the neighboring town of Lewes. He was a trifle disconcerted by the appearance of the other conscientious objectors who were gathered in the hall waiting for the members of the tribunal to enter. There were 7 of them, and, with the exception of an agricultural laborer with an honest, open face, they were miserable, undersized, weakly creatures. It wasn't very pleasant company to be in. Jim, tall and stalwart, felt ill at ease when he looked at them. They wouldn't have been of much use in the army anyway. They were such a pitiable crew, they gave his convictions a shoddiness that momentarily shook him. One, the first to be heard, was obviously filled with self-conceit, and when he was asked on what he based his claim, made a long, rhetorical harangue flaunting his communist beliefs. He was a haberdasher by trade. He refused not only to serve in the army, but to do anything that was even remotely connected with a capitalist war. He challenged the tribunal to send him to prison. The laborer, whose case was heard next, came under a different category. He belonged to a small and obscure sect called the 12 Apostles. In this strange and heartless world, its adherents sought to carry out to the letter the precepts of Jesus Christ. It was moving to hear that plain, unlettered man proclaim in halting words his earnest faith. There could be no doubt of his sincerity. He took them far back, those who were there to decide, and those who were there to be heard, and with an astonished awe you felt that you were listening to one who might himself have been a disciple of the Nazarene. Jim was deeply affected. That good man's idealism was a ray of sunshine that flooded his heart with light, and when his own turn came he faced his judges with manly confidence. He knew personally the members of the tribunal, and the chairman was an intimate friend of his father's. But if any of them thought it strange that he should appear before them, they showed no sign of it. Jim read the short statement he had prepared and answered the questions that were put to him. "Are you prepared to work on the land?" the chairman asked. "Yes, sir. I'll do that very gladly." "Very well." Exemption was granted him. There were several farms on the Graveney estate, but the tribunal had stipulated that he should not work with one of his father's tenants. So next day he applied for a job to a farmer who cultivated his own land. "Conchi, are you?" the farmer asked him. "Yes." "You look a strong, husky young fellow. Have you ever done a day's work in your life?" "Not the sort of work you mean." The man looked him up and down, as though he were a strange animal. "Well, I don't mind giving you a trial. I'm short of hands. All my young chaps are in the army, and I suppose I must put up with any riff-raff I can get." Jim found a room in a cottage near by that belonged to a couple whose son had joined up. He was glad to get away from home. He was sensitive, and the fact that the others, his father, his mother, May, avoided any reference to his inglorious situation exasperated his nerves more than if they had openly condemned it. He felt like a man who has come back to his family after a term of imprisonment, and who knows that they are always on their guard to see that no remark escapes their lips to wound him. He was at ease only with Dora. But since the children had descended upon them, she had been kept too busy to have much time to give him, and he had to content himself with an occasional stroll in the park or a few minutes' conversation when he chanced to catch her by herself. He reproached her sometimes because he saw so little of her, but she told him she thought it wise that they shouldn't seem to be too intimate. "I don't want anyone to suspect that there's anything between us till we've finally made up our minds." "I've made mine up," he said. "I haven't." Her retort would have made him angry and unhappy if she hadn't accompanied it with such a radiant smile. The farm on which Jim had found work was only 6 miles away, and it was arranged that he should come home every Sunday to spend the day. But that would give him small chance of seeing Dora alone, and he exacted a promise from her that now and then, when she could get away, she would meet him of an evening at a little Elizabethan cottage that stood on the brow of a low hill near the high road, but just within one of the park gates. It was only a short bicycle ride from Graveney. It had a thatched roof, and though tiny, was habitable. Indeed, a cranky uncle of the General's had lived in it for years, and in recollection of that the Hendersons still spoke of it as Uncle Algy's cottage. But in the neighborhood it was known as Badger's. Jim had always hoped that Roger, when he succeeded to the property, would let him have it for his own, and he liked to take Dora there and plan the alterations they would make in it. "It would be perfect for you and me," he told her, looking at her with fond eyes. "It certainly has a lovely view," she smiled. Situated, as it was on an elevation, you could see from its windows a great stretch of the surrounding country. "All Sussex is spread before you," he said proudly. "It's sweet. I can't see any reason why we shouldn't get married right away and come and live here." "You must be very stupid then. I've told you often enough." He sighed. He knew by now that when once she had made up her mind, no appeal could shake her. She had decided that to marry him would be a shabby trick to play on his father and mother who had been so kind to her, and though he thought her notion unreasonable, he could not but esteem the delicacy of her scruple. "All the same, I wish you weren't so damned high-minded," he said. It was a lovely autumn. Towards the end of September, Tommy went back to school. But by then a Russian army had entered eastern Poland, and with the invasion, Polish resistance collapsed. Warsaw surrendered. The victors divided the spoils between them. The first brief chapter of the war was written. British troops in a steady stream were ferried across the Channel, and Roger went on the staff of the commander-in-chief. Winter set in. Dick Murray was with his regiment in the wilds of Norfolk. Though it had been a grief to see him go, May was relieved that he was no longer there to drop in at odd moments. She felt that she must keep not only to the letter, but to the spirit of her bargain with Roger, and it was harder to do it when she saw him constantly. She was glad that he, like Roger, was serving the country. They did not write to one another often, but when she got a letter from him, and it wasn't a love letter, it was just an account of what he was doing, interspersed with complaints that it was all very boring, her day was made. She could hear his rich, eager voice in his matter-of-fact phrases, and every casual word told her that he loved her. It was lucky for her that she had plenty to do. Her work kept her so busy that she had little time for thoughts unconnected with it, and, though one day was exactly like the last, the weeks flew by at a gallop. She had not realized that Christmas was so near till Mrs. Henderson announced one morning that she was going up to London to buy presents for the children. A tree was brought in and placed in a private room, and May and Dora in their leisure moments set about decorating it. Tommy came home for the holiday. He had grown, but he was still a little boy, thin and weedy, with hands and feet too big for him and a mop of brown hair that his mother in vain tried to keep tidy. His dark eyes were keen and intelligent. His vitality was so abounding that, except when he was reading, it seemed a torture to him to sit still. You might have thought quicksilver flowed in his veins rather than blood. His movements had the clumsy, charming awkwardness of a newborn colt. Mrs. Henderson, noticing how tall he was growing, could not but think rather sadly that soon his voice would break, and then in a little while he would be a great big fellow like his brothers, and in the grown man she would lose the child who was so dear to her. She thanked God he was too young to fight. No harm could befall him. Christmas Day came. The General, down from London for 48 hours, brought Tommy a new bicycle. The evacuated children were thrilled with their presents, and the Christmas tree, of which they had never seen the like, filled them with admiring wonder. They ate turkey and plum pudding and drank ginger beer. They played games. They had a grand time. One small boy remarked that he didn't care how long the war lasted. It was just after the New Year, one evening, while the children were being given their supper, that Tommy came into the refectory. "May, you're wanted on the phone," he said. "Who is it?" "I can't come now. I'm busy." "It's Dick Murray. He says he only wants to speak to you for a minute." "I'll carry on for you." May was holding a plate heaped with macaroni, and she put it down quickly, for her hand trembled. She knew why Dick was calling. His last letter had told her that his regiment had a good chance of being sent over to France, and he hoped to God it would come off, for he was sick and tired of sitting about and doing nothing. If there was a chance of seeing him before he went, she meant to take it. She couldn't let him leave without at least a glimpse of him. She went out into the hall and then to the library, so that she could speak without risk of being overheard. She lifted the receiver, but her knees were shaking so that she had to sit down. "Yes, May, we're off." His voice was gay and eager. She clenched her hands. "Oh, that's splendid," she said lightly. "When?" "Tonight. We're sailing at dawn." "So soon?" "Oh, Dick." She hadn't expected that, and she had to bite her lip to prevent herself from crying. "You mustn't be upset. I shan't be in any more danger than if we'd stayed on in Norfolk. Nothing is going to happen till the Germans attack in the spring, and then we'll smash them to smithereens." She made an effort. "I hope it won't be dreadfully boring. I'd have given anything in the world to see you to say goodbye. I naturally expected to get a day or two's leave, and I've been grousing like hell at being done out of it." She couldn't speak for a moment, and he asked if she was still there. She strove to keep her voice steady. "Perhaps it's just as well. I don't think I could have borne it. Oh, my sweet." His voice faltered. "Goodbye, darling. God bless you. I love you with all my heart. Goodbye." She put the receiver down. It was all over, and it hadn't lasted 3 minutes. It was too little, oh, so much too little. Her mouth trembled, but she couldn't let herself cry, and she clenched her teeth. She stayed where she was, by the telephone, for a while to collect herself. She couldn't afford to let anyone see that the news she had received meant more to her than it should. Oh, the deceit, how hateful it was. When she went back to the refectory, there was no sign, except the whiteness of her face, that her heart was wrung. "What did he want?" asked Mrs. Henderson. "He rang up to say goodbye. He's going to France tomorrow." "Oh, I'm glad. He must be delighted." He seemed in the highest spirits. Ian was ordered out to France too, for after pulling all possible strings, he had achieved his desire and was once more in khaki. Because he spoke French adequately, he had been made a security officer, which was a job that he thought suited him perfectly. Jane disagreed. She pointed out to him that it needed tact, judgment, and common sense, and no one knew better than she that those were qualities in which he was completely deficient. He listened to her tart remarks without turning a hair. When the time came for him to go, having agreed that she shouldn't come to the station, he and Jane had a last drink together in the drawing-room of their little house in Westminster. He was to sail from Southampton to Cherbourg. "I hope we have a smooth crossing," he said. "You know what a rotten sailor I am. You look awful when you're seasick." "I don't care a hang about that. I feel awful." As a rule, they had plenty to say to one another, but just then, they didn't quite know why, there really didn't seem anything to say. Jane was smoking a cigarette through an immensely long holder and suddenly, as though she were angry with it, took it out and crushed the stub savagely into an ashtray. Ian glanced at his watch and gulped down the last mouthful of his whiskey and soda. "Well, I suppose I ought to be toddling." "Ought you?" She took out her lipstick and applied it to her lips. Looking at herself in her pocket mirror as she did this, she asked casually, "You're quite sure you don't want me to come to the station with you?" "Not on your life. I don't want a hysterical woman sobbing all over my brand new uniform. Hysterical be damned. But what they want to send a fat old man like you to France for is more than I can understand. Old my foot. I'm in the prime of life. And fat my other foot. I've lost 20 pounds since I got back in the army." She gave him a derisive glance. No one would know it to look at you. She fixed him sternly with her monocle. Now look here, Ian, if you see a German coming for you, you run like a hare. He grinned. I don't mind telling you I get awfully out of breath when I run. Well, I warn you, if you go and get yourself killed, I'll never speak to you again. Is that a threat or a promise? Jane threw up her hands in desperation. Why in God's name did I ever marry that man? I can answer that one, he cried with a throaty chuckle. Because no one else was such a fool as to ask you. Jane giggled. That's right. How did you know? He heaved his great weight out of the chair, and taking Jane's hands pulled her to her feet. Give the old man a kiss before he goes. Jane swallowed. Oh God, I believe I'm going to cry. Don't be a damned fool, Jane, he said roughly. Oh God, don't let me cry. I'll never be able to manage that man again if I cry. Think of your eyelashes, darling. Don't think of me. She looked at him with one eye because for a reason she could only guess, the monocle was dimmed and she couldn't see through it. You're old and you're fat and you're stupid, she said angrily, and then her funny hoarse voice went back on her. But you're all I've got in the world, and I don't want to lose you. Shut up, Jane, or I'll give you a sock in the jaw. If you go on like this, you'll have me crying too. I'm not crying, you fool. I won't cry. She made a terrible face. Oh, Ian, I do love you so. I've sort of suspected that for a good many years, dear, he said, taking her in his fat arms. She flung hers round his neck, and with a fearful grimace asked him pitifully, You do like me a bit, don't you? You're a nagging old bitch, Jane, but my God, I love you. Their lips met, and they put into that long kiss all their love and all their devotion. She tore herself away from him. Get the hell out of here. I can't bear it another instant. Without a further word he flung out of the room, slamming the door behind him, as though they had had a prodigious fight. Jane, her eyes on the door by which he had gone, bit her lips to cling on to her self-control. Her comic, ugly face worked in strange contortions. Then she gave up the struggle. To hell with my eyelashes. She threw herself on her knees and joined her hands. Oh God, keep the old fool safe. The tears streamed down her face. They made a terrific mess of her makeup. And in like manner, though in their different ways, women in England through the long, bitter winter said goodbye to their men. They said goodbye to them in the crofts of the distant Hebrides, and in the fishermen's cottages of wind-swept Cornwall, in the slum dwellings of the big cities, in the drab villas of the suburbs, in the orderly houses of the well-to-do, and in the mansions of the great. When it was possible, they went to the station to get a last sight of them as they entrained. On the coaches the men in high spirits chalked up facetious quips. Hang out your washing on the Siegfried line. They sang lustily as the train steamed out. They were going to France. They were going to Gibraltar, Malta, Egypt, or the East. Not all of them, it might be, would reach their destination in safety. The women, many of them crying still, flowed out of the station and went about their chores. Jane continued to lead her normal life. She went out to dinner a great deal and lunched at the Ritz where you saw everyone you knew. She gave smart little parties in her tiny house. Since she lived in a convenient spot, friends of Rogers from the War Office, men at the Foreign Office, and members of the House of Commons were glad to drop in of an evening for a cocktail and a gossip. She generally had a funny story to tell about this general or that, or a bit of scandal about a cabinet minister, and you were pretty sure of 2 or 3 good laughs when you went to see her. Her fantastic appearance added point to her wisecracks. Of course the war was a crashing bore, but it was no use to pull a long face, and she didn't see why she shouldn't get what fun out of it she could. It certainly gave her ample scope for her sardonic wit. She missed Ian, he was the perfect foil, and when the conversation was growing sticky, she could always count on him to rise when, as though it were a fly and he the fat trout he really rather looked like, she flung a caustic remark at him. They played into one another's hands like a pair of black-faced comedians. But when people asked her if she missed him, Jane shrugged her shoulders nonchalantly. I suppose I do in a way. Sometimes I could kill him when he's here, but there's no doubt about it. Absence does make the heart grow fonder. She was thankful that he was in no danger. Some of the people who came to see her were quite important, and it was a comfort to her to be told by them that everything was going according to plan. The blockade was doing very well, and the information that came out of Germany was that there was already a considerable shortage of raw materials. The Germans weren't starving yet, though they'd had to tighten their belts, but they were suffering from cold, for owing to the breakdown of transport, they couldn't get coal in sufficient quantity. That could hardly fail to have a depressing effect on the population, which in any case had accepted the war with resignation rather than with enthusiasm. For the sake of morale, if for no other reason, Hitler would have to attack in the spring. The Maginot Line was impregnable. It was common knowledge that though the generals, who belonged to the old army, weren't to be despised, the Germans suffered from a serious lack of company commanders, and when they got up against the well-trained and well-officered troops of the French, they'd discover what a fatal handicap that was. After they'd been beaten back from the Maginot Line, the Allies would advance. The Germans would have to dig in, if a revolution didn't break out, and put an end to the whole show without any more bother, and then all the Allies had to do was to sit tight and let the blockade do the rest. Jane's friends at the Foreign Office told her they were pretty confident that Italy would stay out. Bastianini, the ambassador, informed everybody who was prepared to listen that she would never fight her old ally England. It was reassuring to hear those Foreign Office men talk. They were so calm, apparently so unconcerned. You couldn't but feel that there was nothing to worry about. The war might have been a game they were playing, a game you played according to the rules in a gentlemanlike way, and if you lost it, which was out of the question but of course possible, you must take your defeat like a good sportsman. One evening Jane had 3 ministers of the crown at dinner.